Neutral density filters. What are they? Do I need one? Neutral density filters attach to camera lenses and reduce the amount of light getting through to your camera sensor without affecting the colours, hopefully. Neutral density filters allow you to take long exposures in daylight, allowing you to flatten water and make clouds look super cool in a streaky, blurry, amongst other things kind of way. Neutral density filters allow you to use wide apertures in bright conditions and can also prevent you from getting overexposed photos in those bright conditions. And yes, I have one that I absolutely love. You can think of neutral density filters as sunglasses for your camera lens. Yes, really. And that was the answer bit. How utterly splendid. Hi, and a very warm welcome to episode 207 of the Photography Explained podcast. I'm your host Rick, and in each episode I will try to explain one photographic thing to you in plain English in less than 27 minutes-ish, without the irrelevant details. Yes, really. I'm a professionally qualified photographer based in England with a lifetime of photographic experience, which I share with you in my splendid podcast. Okay, firstly, what are they? What are neutral density filters? Neutral density filters are also called ND filters for obvious reasons, and that's what I'm going to call them for the rest of this episode, which saves me saying the words in full and saves us both some time. Neutral means the colours don't change, and the density bit refers to how much light is blocked. But the colours can change. With my ND filter, I can get a blue cast sometimes with long exposures that I have to correct. It's a real blue cast. You can't live with that, absolutely not. So you'll need to work out if the ND filter that you have affects the colours or not. It's easy enough to do, don't worry. Just take a photo without the ND filter and take one with it and compare them. And this is the only downside of ND filters, which I wanted to get out of the way at the very beginning. But it's manageable if you know what you need to do and how to do it, so don't let that put you off. There's no need. What are ND filters made of? Well, the decent ones are made of glass or resin and probably some other types of plastic, and that's about it. How much light is blocked by an ND filter? Well, it depends. An ND2 filter gives a one-stop reduction in light, an ND4 filter a two-stop reduction, ND8 3 stops, ND16 4 stops, ND32 5 stops, ND64 6 stops, and apparently ND1000 gives a 10-stop reduction, and that is what I have, yes really. Now I don't love the ND2, ND4 etc. terms. What it means is this: an ND2 filter reduces the light getting through by half, an ND4 reduces the amount of light getting through by a quarter, ND8 an eighth, etc, etc. But for my simple head, that doesn't really mean much to me. I prefer to go with the stop reduction because that ties into the aperture scale and the shutter speed scale, which makes sense to me. And as I say, with my filter it's 10 stops. 10 stops means something. A quarter light reduction doesn't. Maybe it's just me on that. And for completeness, a stop is a halving or a doubling of light. I know it all amounts to the same, it's just we all prefer to call things in different ways, don't we, which is fine. But whatever you use, the higher the number, the greater the reduction in light. Let's keep it simple. Filters and stops, the important bit. Yeah, we need to know what's going on when we're using an ND filter. I just want to put this in the context of other camera settings. A one-stop adjustment to an exposure can be made by using an ND2 filter, changing the aperture from f8 to f11, which is reducing the amount of light getting through by one stop, or by changing the shutter speed from 1/125th of a second to 1/60th of a second, also reducing the amount of light getting through by one stop. Now, these adjustments all reduce the amount of light getting through to the camera sensor. And let's not forget ISO. Changing the ISO from 200 to 100 gives the same overall effect as the changes above. But you can think of a neutral density filter as being part of the exposure triangle, where your three components are aperture, shutter speed, and the filter. See, I don't change the ISO unless I have to. I've said enough on that before. I think I need to come back to that one again. Not that I've ever used the exposure triangle, not knowingly anyway. Okay, so here's a practical example of what happens when you use an ND filter. Now, this is a complicated bit, but I need to go through it and hopefully it'll make sense. It probably sounds worse than it really is. And if you're in auto or semi-auto picture taking modes, you don't have to make any adjustments, but you really do need to know what's going on with these filters. You need to know what they're doing to your camera settings. So let's take a typical exposure. 1/250th of a second, f8, ISO 100. So you add an ND filter, which gives you a one-stop reduction in light, and to get the correct exposure, you need more light. So you reduce the shutter speed by one stop to let one stop more light in. So you change from 1/250th of a second to 1/125th of a second, which is the sensor is exposed for longer, meaning more light gets through. On my script I've written less time, less light, and it's more time, more light. Oops. Glad I spotted that now in the recording, because I'd be mortified if I published that. Okay, so if we've added the ND filter giving a one-stop reduction, the other way we can get back to the correct exposure is to change the aperture by one stop to a larger aperture, letting more light in. So you change the aperture from f8 to f5.6, which is a larger opening, which is more light. Or you can change the ISO to 200 from 100, which is making the photo brighter by a stop. But add a 10-stop ND filter and you've got a lot more to think about. Your shutter speed goes from 1/250th of a second to, wait for it, 4 seconds. Yes, really, 1/250th of a second to 4 seconds. And 1/125th of a second becomes 8 seconds. 1/60th of a second, 16 seconds. 16 seconds, that is a super long exposure, which you can do in broad daylight, and that is the power of an ND filter. This is serious stuff. Okay, before I get too excited, you can also get variable ND filters. You get more than one amount of reduction, and typical ranges for variable ND filters are 2 to 5 stop reductions. Now I quite fancy one of these, but to be honest, I like my extreme 10 stop filter so much I have never got beyond that. Yeah, I really do have a 10 stop filter, and it's a monster, it's epic. Okay, how do I attach an ND filter to my camera lens? Well, there are generally two different types of filters. There are ones that screw direct to the lens, and the ones that have a holder that attaches to the lens that you put the filter into. Filter holders are great, as you can use one filter and holder with different sized adapter rings. This means that with my, and I'll be honest with you now, it was expensive, ND filter, that comes with a holder, so I can use the same filter with my Canon 17 to 40mm lens, which has a 77mm filter thread size, and I can also use the same filter with a different adapter on my Olympus 12 to 40mm lens, which has a 62mm filter thread. Adapters are a lot cheaper than filters, so that's why I do that. It saves me a lot of money, and I've only got one filter to look after. And this filter, it's a square filter with a square filter holder. And, not surprisingly, filters that screw directly onto lenses are circular. And, yeah, something I need to say here. The big filter and holder, it does look rather odd on my small camera. And it's a bit counterintuitive when you think about it, isn't it? The reasons why you might have a smaller camera. But I don't use it all the time, it's for occasional use, it doesn't bother me, it's fine. So what I've got is I've got one filter, I've got two adapter rings, 62mm and 77mm, and one filter holder. And that's all I've got. And here is a top tip for you, step down rings. If you want an ND filter that screws into your filter thread, and you buy a filter for the largest lens that you've got, You can then buy a step-down ring, which means that you can use, say, a 77mm filter with a step-down ring on a lens with, say, a 62mm filter thread. Saves you loads of money. How utterly splendid. Talking of money, are ND filters expensive? Well, as with any question related to anything in photography, it depends, doesn't it? I have a Lee Big Stopper, which gives me a whopping 10 stop reduction. And no, I'm not being paid to say this, I bought this with my own money. Now, checking out a well-known online retailer, this goes for about £100. Yeah, not cheap, I know. But I bought mine many, many years ago, and it's as good now as the day I bought it. And the holder goes for around 30 quid, and the adapter rings are about 20 quid. I say around because there are a surprising range of different products, even with that specific filter. There's all sorts out there, so it's around 100 quid, but you get the idea. And there are many pretty good cheaper brands out there these days, so check them out if you fancy buying one of these splendid accessories. Now, I always say buy the best gear that you can afford, look after it, and it will serve you well for many years. And I've had my ND filter for well over a decade now. But I appreciate £100 is a lot of money with the holder and all that stuff, so if you're not sure, but you like the sound of it, buy a cheap one, give it a go and see if it's for you. But with cheaper filters, there is a higher chance of getting a colour cast, and there is a higher chance of a reduction in image quality, so you need to choose carefully. Okay, graduated ND filters. I nearly forgot these, which is surprising because I used to use these for years. These are part clear, part ND bit, typically half and half with a transition from one to the other in the middle. And you can use these to balance out an exposure when you're taking a photo with a dark foreground and a light sky, or a sunset over the sea, or anything, or even where you've got a dark sky and a lighter foreground. It's balancing out the exposure, that's the point of it. And I know that we can do that in post-processing, but if you can get the exposure correct in camera, it's a better start. And there are lots of these ND graduated filters, lots of different types, different strengths, different locations of the transition from clear to some form of density. And there's a range of transitions, softness and hardness. So there's lots of variables here, lots of products, but the same principles as above apply. And you need holders for these. Right, what can I do with an ND filter? Well, you can take super long exposures in broad daylight. And this is what I love to do. I use my ND filter to take long exposures of any kind of water and also clouds. Those are the main things that I have my ND filter for. I mean, long exposure photography in broad daylight, it's a bit of a game changer, isn't it? So, as I said before, I'll say it again because it's such a significant change. If you've got a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second giving a correct exposure, chuck a 10-stop ND filter on and your shutter speed for the correct exposure is now 4 seconds. And you can quickly get to 8, 16, 32 if you want, and I'll say it again, it's a complete game changer. So you can do long exposures in broad daylight, and if you think about it, even longer exposures in low light, let's not forget that. Now, I've photographed many things with my ND filter, which include a jetty on a Greek island with a super flat sea. Yeah, that was the first time I'd taken a 30-second exposure in broad daylight, and it was bright daylight because it was on a Greek island in the summer. And what else have I done? Well, buildings with dreamy moving clouds, I loved doing that. Various rivers with super flat water. Waterfalls with lovely, blurry, fluffy water. And then there's moving vehicles, moving trains, and there's all sorts of stuff I've had to play around with in the past. But this is what you need to think about. Just think of any photo with something moving in it, and how you can transform that photo by making the exposure loads longer. The possibilities are endless, so give it a go and let me know how you get on. And if you've got a 2-stop and a 3-stop ND filter, you can chuck them together and you can get 5 stops if you want. But please remember, the more things we put in front of our lenses, the higher the chances of a reduction in image quality. Okay, moving on. Shallow depth of field. Sometimes you can't get a shallow depth of field because the light's too bright, and if you use a large aperture, your photos will be overexposed. An ND filter very quickly fixes this problem. And the same if it's so bright your photos are just overexposed. Okay, so that's what you can do with an ND filter. The possibilities are endless. Just have a think about what you could do with something moving in a photo. So here's something for you to do. Why not get a cheap ND filter that fits your favourite lens and get out there and have a go and see what you think? But to get the most out of one of these, you're going to need a tripod. I should have said that earlier, but I'm saying it now. And if you don't have a tripod, don't let that stop you. You can use anything to rest a camera on if you really think about it. Now, back in the day, I used to own a beanbag and that worked just fine. It's like a waterproof material beanbag that was designed to put a camera on so you didn't need a tripod. So there's always other ways to do these things. Like I say, don't let not having a tripod be a barrier. Get creative, have a try, and let me know what tripod substitute you come up with. And also if you like the ND filter effect. Have a go, let me know, it'd be great to hear from you. Right, what if I use a phone to take photos? Well, I didn't know, so I had a look. And guess what? Yes, you can get clip-on ND filters for phones. I don't fancy doing this myself, but if you do, why not give it a go? You might not have a camera, you might only have a phone, so let's not exclude you if you haven't got a camera. But if you're going to do that, I think you'll need an app to control the shutter speed. It's not something I've done before. It's a bit too fiddly for me, and I'm in the fortunate position of having cameras, so I don't need to faff around with my phone, do I? No, you don't, Rick. And obviously a tripod or some kind of holder for your phone would help if you're going to use slower shutter speed. If anybody out there has a go at this, let me know how it works for you with a phone. I'd love to know. It's not something I've thought about, if I'm being completely honest about it. I'm not sure why I use the term if I'm being completely honest about it, as everything else is a pack of lies if I don't say that. Move on, Rick. What do? I use a 10-stop ND filter, and I absolutely love it. I've got one filter holder, and 2 adapter rings for the lenses that I use with my ND filter. I don't use it on all my lenses, I only use it on 2, so that's why I've only got the 2 adapters. And I look after my ND filter with the same care I do all my gear. And that's how this filter has lasted me so long. But there is an issue with using a 10-stop filter. You put that on your camera lens and you can't see much through it. It's got such a darkening effect. You can't really see what you're doing. It's virtually impossible to compose a photo because it's so dark. And focusing is more of a challenge too for the camera. And that's why when I'm using my 10-stop ND filter, I put my camera on a tripod. Now, I know I take as many photos as I can with my camera on a tripod, especially with my 10-stop ND filter. And this is what I do. I compose and focus without the filter in the holder, and then I slide the filter into the holder and I take the photo. And I'm using AV mode, so the aperture's set and the camera is choosing the shutter speed, so I don't need to worry about any of that. And I also use back button focus when I'm taking photos using my ND filter. So I compose without the filter on, I focus, and then when I press the shutter button it starts to self-timer and the metering happens then, and that's with the filter on. That's how I do it. I'm using a self-timer as well to make sure every long exposure I take is still nice and sharp. Because you've got to be a bit more careful at 30 seconds. You've got to be a lot more careful. Because we need to remember this, 1/250th of a second, you're going to get a sharp photo most of the time. Yes, if you've got a focal length above 250mm, there is a risk of camera shake. But if you're careful, you're going to get a sharp photo with that shutter speed. Not the case with 4 seconds. On a tripod, you've got to be careful. You've just got to think about this and make sure you're doing everything you can do to get that sharp photo. Because if it's not sharp, you're wasting your time, aren't you? And this is one time when I might well use manual mode and work out the settings myself, and I have an app for this. There's no point trying to work out 10 stops when there's an app that does it for me instantly. And this point about not being able to compose and focus with the filter on, how do you do it with a screw-in filter? It sounds a bit too difficult for me, and that's why I've stuck with the filter holder route. And that's what I do. Okay, some thoughts from the last episode. Well, the last episode, 21 composition tips to help take better photos of buildings. How utterly splendid. Now, this was the things that came into my head as I wrote this episode. It wasn't planned to be 21 things. I didn't aim for 21 things. It's just that's what I ended up with, and it was an excellent episode too, if I do say so myself. Next episode, same question, but this time about polarizing filters. Yes, I'm covering the other half of my range of filters. I've only got two. One's an ND filter, one's a polarizing filter. So that's that. Okay, a quick plug for me and what I do. Well, why not? If I can't plug myself on my own podcast, where can I? So you found this podcast, why not check out the podcast website, photographyexplainedpodcast.com, and my other photography website, rickmcevoyphotography.com, where I write blog posts about my photos of buildings and other good stuff. And on my courses page, rickmcevoyphotography.com/courses, you will find my course, How to Become a Real Estate Photographer. And you can also find me on YouTube talking about my podcast. You can find the audio versions of these podcast episodes. And there are a number of full-length podcast episode videos. Well, why not, eh? Just type my name in and you will soon find me. Get an email from me. If you want a weekly email from me, and why wouldn't you? Fill in the box on any of my websites, and every Friday you will read what I'm thinking about, photography related. How utterly splendid. And that's the self-promotion over. Back to you, dear listener. If you've got a question you would like me to answer, or you just want to say hi, email me, sales@rickmcevoyphotography.co.uk. And you can text me from the podcast feed. It's always lovely to hear from you, dear listeners, whichever way you get in touch. Right, this episode, it was brought to you by a cheese and ham sandwich and a bag of smoky bacon crisps. Yes, a complete variety in my diet there, which I consumed before settling in my homemade acoustically cushioned recording emporium. I've been Rick McEvoy. I can't believe I'm still saying that. Thanks again for listening to my small but perfectly formed podcast, it says here, and for giving me 27 minutes-ish of your valuable time. I reckon this episode will be about 20 to 22 minutes long after I've edited out the mistakes and the other bad stuff. Hard to tell really, because I spent 10 minutes recording the wrong, unfinished and not very good script, so I need to delete all that first, so about 20 to 22 minutes. Not that it matters, because you downloaded this podcast so you know how long it is, so I'm going to shut up and move on there, but it'd be nice to have a short episode for a change, wouldn't it? Okay, I'm going to say goodbye there. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate you. Take care. Stay safe. Cheers from me, Rick.